4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
If a man plays the fool, then it's only fools he'll persuade, but appear to be the devil, and all men will submit.
And would you be the devil?
All a big show. Give your quarry something to fear. Some hellish thing from a fever dream. And men will drop to their knees, pleading for their lord before all else.
Greetings, fellow barbarians. It is I, Alan Odinson, and you are listening to the Barbarian Lounge podcast. I want to thank everyone for joining us this week. We've got a pretty interesting subject. We're going to be talking piracy, my friends. We're going to be talking the most infamous, most notorious pirate in the history of the craft. We're going to be talking Blackbeard the pirate. Everybody knows I'm big on the pirate culture and everything that goes with that, and we're going to be discussing that. We're going to talk about elements of Blackbeard. We're going to give you his history, his story. There's a lot of things people don't particularly realize about Blackbeard's history. There's a lot of false information, and we're going to hash a little bit of that out here. I'll give you some recommended reading and some other things that you may be interested in checking out as it relates to Blackbeard and specifically the Republic of Pirates. It's another little piece of history not a lot of people know about, and we're going to be discussing elements of that, but mostly focusing on Blackbeard and his role. But first off, let's get a little bit of this housekeeping out of the way before we get started. You can check us out on Facebook. Find the Barbarian Lounge podcast on Facebook. There you can get all the information, latest updates, and articles that we post. It's the easiest way to follow us. You can also subscribe to our website, our official page on Podbean. That would be the Barbarian Lounge at podbean.com. That's thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com to find out all the latest information, all the things we got going on. That's the best way to keep up with our podcast. I usually do these on a Friday, but I've been so excited about this subject, I really wanted to get it out. As you folks know, we just were offering a t-shirt, the official Barbarian Lounge Blackbeard t-shirt. Amazing shirt. That campaign has ended, but don't fear, that is still available. You can go to the link. I'll attach a link where you can actually go ahead and still get that shirt if you're interested. After listening to this podcast, you may definitely have a different opinion on the culture of the pirate. Another thing that I definitely do not want to look over is sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Mitacon. If you're interested in Mitacon, check it out. It's an amazing supplement. It's not an energy. I keep wanting to say it's an energy drink, but it's not an energy drink. It is a drink that provides natural energy for your body. It works on the mitochondrial level, activates that mitochondria, gets you going. There's no crash, there's no insane high. It's just a steady boost of energy, and I'm telling you, if you haven't tried it, there's a lot of big companies that are getting involved with it, and if you haven't, man, check it out. Mitacon. You can find information about them online. You can check them out on Facebook at Mitacon on there, and if you need any more information about it, hey, contact me. I can give you some information and connect you to the man himself. So, alright, Blackbeard. Blackbeard the pirate, right? I know everybody that hears this wants to automatically go R, but I swear I cannot stand every time I mention piracy or the pirates of the Golden Age of piracy. I hesitate to say Pirates of the Caribbean, but or the Caribbean, whatever part of the country you're from. But I can't stand. You mentioned the golden age of piracy and Blackbeard. Everybody goes "Arr," like they're an idiot, But it's ridiculous. So I'll try not to rant about that. So Blackbeard, who was Blackbeard the pirate? Well, everybody knows the legend of Blackbeard. You may not know his name. The names he went by, really, other than Blackbeard, there was Edward Teach, Edward Tack, Edward Thatch, all these different names. But one thing they all have in common is they were a pseudonym. None of them were actually his name. He used these names as a pseudonym to protect his family because he knew if he was ever captured for piracy, he may actually bring dishonor to his family. It could be an issue to where revenge was taken maybe by another country in some aspects, which we'll talk about that later. Pretty surprising stuff there, where he didn't want revenge to be taken upon his family, so he used this pseudonym of Edward Teach and, of course, or Edward Thatch. Those were the two main names that he went by. He probably, with his accent, probably just said Edward Tack, and it probably ended up becoming Teach, Tatch, Thatch, all these different names. So he lived. The era of the time he was born is kind of in question. Not a lot of people know. A lot of people suspect he died around the age of 36, 37. But this is the main thing that I want to get across here. The era in which he operated. The years he operated. You think as a notorious pirate, he probably had all these years of piracy and it was just, man, it was crazy. No. Actually, the primary time that he was his own captain as Blackbeard was during the years of 1716 through 1718. Yeah, roughly 2.5, 3 years was the time he was actually his own captain, doing his own thing and waging war against an empire. Just that little time. Think about that. There are many pirates who lasted longer than that. The infamous Henry Morgan, the Captain Morgan. Everybody thinks of rum. Henry Morgan. He lasted a long, long time. He managed to even retire and die of old age. Massive fortune he got. I mean, so you had a lot of pirates who were doing this a lot longer than Teach. However, none of them established the reputation that he was able to establish in such a short amount of time. So, how was this possible? Well, while a lot of the other pirates, from the books that I've read, a lot of the other pirates were interested in the treasure, man. They were interested in getting the gold, getting the loot. Blackbeard was more interested in developing a legacy and a reputation of someone who would be remembered throughout history. And I'd be damned if he didn't do that, right? So his whole goal was to build an image, build this legacy of the baddest man on the seas. And we're going to discuss a little bit later, once we get some more into the history, we're going to discuss, why he was this guy that waged war against the empire. Because, yeah, a lot of people don't, and this is a part of history that just bugs me, is how suppressed it is. But a lot of people don't know about the Republic of Pirates and a lot of the things these guys were doing there in the Caribbean. These men were standing up against the empire of, honestly, they were standing against the British, they were standing against the Spanish, the French. They were this small group of, I'll use air quotes, bandits, who were standing against an empire at the time. They wanted to create their own thing. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Maybe, I don't know, the American colonist? Yeah, these guys attempted a revolutionary war before the American colonists even dreamt of the concept of revolution. They were happy slaves at the time. And this was many, many years before these guys even thought about revolution. And here you had these group of people who were considered criminals, who just wanted to be left alone, wanted to have their own thing, and they were going to wage war in the best way they knew how in order to get it. So let's talk a little bit about this history. How did this happen? How did Blackbeard, how did the Republic of Pirates in general get started? To understand that, you have to look back towards the famous guy who sailed the ocean blue, Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, during the times of 1492 through about 1503 or so, he made 4 trips between Spain and America. I don't need to tell you who Christopher Columbus is. If you don't know who the fuck Christopher Columbus is, take your ass back to school. Jesus Christ. So during these travels and these different 4 trips, a lot of people don't even realize he made 4 trips back and forth between the two. But he founded, or I say he founded. I use air quotes. He came upon the islands around the Bahamas and Cuba, Central America, the upper part of South America, and once he established these areas, Spain basically kind of drew a line down the middle of the globe there, because this was prior to a lot of the discoveries of the actual North American continents there. But so Spain drew a line. They drew a line down the middle of the globe here and basically said, you know what? Everything on the left side is ours. And being the English the way they are, they said to themselves, you know what? We're going to launch a counteroffensive on this because you can't have it all. That's not going to happen. So basically what the English did was they decided to send an invasion force over there. They sent an invasion force into the area. And when they sent that invasion force into the area, they took over, they tried to take a couple areas around there, but they ended up taking Jamaica, or as it was known at the time as the colony of Santiago. They ended up taking Jamaica. And they established a spot in Jamaica. And basically the reason they took Jamaica, it's not like it was just unoccupied, but basically Jamaica had very low defenses in the area, because during the time there was a lot of conflict in the area, and just between warring tribes of the different regions. So what they did was they ended up taking Jamaica and controlling that area. Well, naturally the English couldn't really. This was just kind of a territory issue. So the English didn't want to commit their entire army to this area. After all, I mean, who's got the money to do all that when the English are too busy trying to build their empire in other areas? So what they decided to do was they decided to go with a cheap route on it. And basically they're doing what you see this country doing today, is they hired out contractors. These contractors basically were hired by the English, and these contractors, their job was to go out and under the rule of the English licensure, basically the English would give them a license to be pirates. They give them licenses to go, and they would raid Spanish ships in the area. What they would do is these privateers, as they were called, they were private contractors. They would go, they would take a Spanish ship, loot the ship, bring the contents back to Jamaica, into that Port Royal area, and then they would unload this stuff and split the profits with the governor or the English or the British monarchy in that area. So these people were known also as buccaneers. You might wonder where that buccaneer. The buccaneer comes from the word bucan, which is basically like a flat wooden, almost kind of like a smoker grill. Basically, in the area, once the Spanish came into the area there, they unleashed a bunch of pigs and livestock on the area, so it would flourish. So when they were coming back and forth, they'd be able to survive. Well, you had a lot of these men who were staying there. These guys would stay there, and they learned from the natives there how to basically smoke this meat to keep it. And it was on a bucan, and naturally these people, they were doing this all the time, so they started calling them the buccaneers. And once that became westernized, it became the buccaneers. So these guys were buccaneers. They were legal thieves under licensure. They were legal thieves under the crown. Their job was to go out, attack those Spanish ships, and take the treasure from them, take the supplies. It wasn't just gold and stuff that was shipped back and forth. You had wheat, you had sugar, you had flour, different cloth fibers, all this stuff. But gold was the big key. when the Spanish were coming into the area, you know, we all know the stories of the Aztecs and everything, and all the gold and all the stuff that was in the area. Well, the Spanish were getting all this massive amounts of gold and silver, and they were coming back across and selling it back to Spain. Well, this was prime opportunity for the Buccaneers to, under legal authority from the crown, to start taking these ships down. And that's precisely what they did. Just a massive amount of gold going back and forth. It was just a feeding ground for piracy at the time. So the culture, I will say this is one of the things that's misconstrued a little bit in history. When people think of the pirates, they think of bloodthirsty, just everybody walks the plank, everybody dies when they take a ship, they kill everybody, throw them overboard, shoot everybody. That's the concept behind it. Actually, if you look historically, most of the horrific acts in the age of piracy, and there are different ages of it, but in the age of piracy, most of the horrific acts that happened were under the banner of privateering. They were done by the buccaneers and not a lot of these people that we hear of during this golden age of piracy. Edward Teach, Charles Vane, Bartholomew Roberts, a lot of these guys, Calico Jack, those particular guys, they were not known for all these horrible things. Now, there were exceptions. Edward Lowe was a definite exception to that. But they were not known for just killing everybody and ransacking towns and raping all the women and shooting all the people there and burning to the ground. They weren't necessarily known for that unless severely provoked. However, the privateers and the buccaneers were known because they were fighting under the banner of the legal banner of the crown. They were known for going in there and just absolutely trashing and destroying the Spanish settlements in the area. So that gets confused a lot of times, and as we'll talk about later with some of the Republic of Pirates and what they were trying to accomplish there, you see what happens when a rebellion occurs. Whenever a rebellion occurs, it gets two things happen to it. If you lose, two things will happen to it if you lose. If you lose, the rebellion will be suppressed into something insignificant. I can't really say that word. It will be repressed into something insignificant, and it will also, the rebellers will also be demonized. And that's what we saw with nobody's hardly ever heard of Republic of Pirates and what they were doing there. But everybody knows that these pirates were horrible people and they did these horrible things, and it was just absolutely just terrors of the sea. Well, that's because they lost this rebellion. If the Americans would have lost the American Revolution, the story wouldn't have been brave colonists fight back against tyrannical British oppressors. No, it would have been American colony terrorists defeated by the glorious Republic, the glorious empire of the British Crown. You know, it would have been something ridiculous like that. So you have to understanding the concept of the privateer helps you understand where these guys come from. So with Blackbeard, he was a privateer at the time working under Benjamin Hornigold. I'm sure people have probably heard of him. But Benjamin Hornigold was he was a very popular privateer during the time. He was the captain, and he actually mentored Blackbeard in a lot of aspects of navigation at sea, combat, and command. A lot of people also don't realize that Blackbeard was highly educated. He could read, which that was something that was surprising back then. He could read. He was very skilled at navigation. He had a sense, from the things I've read, of knowing his men, almost kind of like a sixth sense of just kind of a knowing that something was going to happen. But eventually, with Benjamin Hornigold, after this whole war was over with, this war was known as the Queen Anne's War, this war between the Spanish and the British there. Once this war was over with, you had all these privateers who had this skill. They had been robbing and stealing under the crown legally. Well, now that a treaty had been signed between the groups, what now? All these guys were out of work. none of them had a job anymore because what they were doing legally was now considered illegal. And it was punishable by death in many accounts. So you have all these guys, you have this massive breeding ground of people who were legal thieves. Now they don't have a job. The only thing they know how to do is steal. And it was legal before. What changes it from being good then to now being bad? Nothing's changed. The act is the same. However, it's just a matter of legality that differentiates the two. And honestly, we see similar to that in today's modern society. You can't take people and give them a training and tell them it's legal to do this at this time, and then when they get back here in the U.S. say, you know what, you can't do that anymore because that's wrong. Well, it wasn't wrong when I was over there doing it for you. So this was the mindset that a lot of these privateers had now. They were unemployed, and they had a certain skill set, but they couldn't use it anymore. So naturally, you start seeing these guys moving back to their own ways. Now, with Hornigold had an issue where he did not like stealing from English ships. He kept the same, or the British ships, he kept the same mentality as he did during the Queen Anne's War, where he was only going to rob from the French, from the Spanish. Those are the only ones he was going to steal from, not from any of the English ships. Well, this caused some issue between him and his crew. A lot of people don't realize this with the pirate culture in general. A pirate captain did not have absolute control. The only times that a pirate captain actually had complete and utter control over his men was during times of battle. That's it. The navigation was typically done by you had a guy that did the navigation. If somebody was trying to decide where they were going to attack, that was done by the crew. They had a version of like a direct democracy. If you don't know what direct democracy is, it's almost exactly as it sounds. You go to each person and say, what do you want to do? 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 And you go through each person, and whoever's got the most number of votes, they win, and that's what they do. So every single person got a vote, and the captain only got one vote as well. So it was very difficult for a captain to maintain control. Well, when you've got all these people who are in this area around Jamaica and around this Port Royal, these guys are wanting to take ships. They're seeing English ships, and Hornigold's like, nope, not going to do it. So another thing that could happen to a captain was his position could be temporary, meaning he could be voted out on a whim. If the crew became disgruntled, they could form a mutiny, and you're gone. And a lot of times they would just load you up on a ship and tell you to go, and that's exactly what happened to Hornigold. Edward Teach actually remained loyal to Hornigold and left with him. And they did some little small things on the side to try and keep the piracy going. At one point, it's kind of funny when you're looking at the history. At one point, they actually did not have a ship. They had very large canoes with a very small crew, and these guys were taking the smaller ships, of course, and they worked their way up. But they would wait in a cove for one of these smaller ships to come in and would row after it. And they would actually take ships this way with a canoe. If that's not some gangster shit, I don't know what is, right? I mean, come on. So, eventually you had Hornigold. These guys ended up departing, leaving each other. You had Hornigold separated from Edward Teach. And Hornigold took the ship known as the Ranger, and Teach ended up taking a ship that was known as the Revenge. And they parted ways. So, of course, Blackbeard did a few things on the side, building up a little bit of attacks here and there, and just generally trying to build a reputation. But he never could find that one thing that was just going to get him, make him stand out from everybody else. Well, then he heard news of the death of Samuel Bellamy. And Samuel Bellamy was a good friend of his. He had worked with Samuel Bellamy during the age of during their privateering years. And Samuel Bellamy was out, just like they were, out doing their thing, doing their piracy. And they were attacking whomever. And Bellamy's ship actually encountered a hurricane, or some people say it was just a massive storm. Some people say hurricane. Either way, a big storm rolled in and sunk the ship. The ship was absolutely destroyed, and it went to the bottom, took Samuel Bellamy with it. Well, several of Bellamy's survivors ended up marooned on an island there. They managed to survive. Wasn't many of them. It was only 9 people. Well, the ship that ended up coming to their aid was an English vessel out of Boston, and that ship grabbed them and loaded them up, took them back to Boston, and decided to try them for piracy, to hang them. This infuriated Edward Teach. Infuriated him. Because Bellamy was his friend, and as far as he was concerned, these guys, they had a code. People don't realize that these pirates had a code. They had a code they lived by. They had articles that were very similar in most groups, but there was a code. And it was a brotherhood. They were known in many circles as the Brethren of the Coast. This was a brotherhood. And the way that Teach viewed this, he viewed this as, they attacked my brothers. They got them at the lowest point when they were starving, they were injured, they had no hope, and then you grab them and you're going to try them and go hang them? Well, this infuriated him. So he thought to himself, you know what? That's it. And this was the big turning point for Blackbeard. He thought to himself, you know what? I'm going to attack Boston. That's right, attack Boston. We're not talking a ship, we're talking a city. He was going to attack Boston. It was at that moment he decided he was going to wage war against the Empire. But in order to do this, he knew he needed a sloop of war, which is a ship of war, a man of war type ship, one powerful enough to come in and just wreck Boston. This is something he didn't have at the time. Very difficult to take with the current ship that he had. Had a very small ship. I think it said it had 8 to 10 guns on it. Very small. A lot of pirate ships were not these massive, huge vessels and stuff like that. They liked them small. They traveled. They wanted them to be fast because a lot of times you had to catch these ships. They didn't have large cannons on them that could sink a ship because, let's be honest, what good does it do to sink a ship if you've got all the goods on there, right? The idea was to take the ship, and they had a lot of different pirate tech that they used to bring down ships and stop them. The goal was to stop it in its place. But in order to wage war, he knew he needed something bigger. It was around this time that he saw this massive ship with a black flag on it, torn to pieces, come rolling in, and it hit there at it stopped there at the port. And off come this little fat guy named Stede Bonnet. Stede Bonnet was, you could refer to him as a landlubber, I guess you could say. He was kind of more of I think he was a grower, a plantation owner. His family come from aristocracy, so he was rich. He didn't have to be a pirate. But he was more of a fanboy, I guess you could say, of piracy. He was just infatuated by it, and he wanted to be a pirate. But he had no experience. All he had was money. He had purchased and got this huge, massive ship. I don't remember how many guns they said it had. I want to say they said it had like 25 guns on it, somewhere around there. But a massive ship, but he didn't know how to sail it. So what had happened, the reason his ship was destroyed is he had made a poor judgment call for them to attack a certain vessel, and they got absolutely destroyed. He wasn't mortally wounded, but he was severely wounded. And he was in really, really bad shape. So he rolls in there to port, and Blackbeard sees this, and he's like, there's some opportunity there. So he starts talking to him and Hornigold, start speaking to Stede Bonnet about using their ship. Bonnet's in bad shape, so he says, you know what? Sure thing, let's do it. I mean, after all, he was kind of a fanboy, right? So they sailed off, and they started using Bonnet's ship. It took him a little while to get it repaired, get it fixed up. Once they got it ready, he loaded some of the guns from his ship onto this ship. It was ready to go. Off they went. As they started traveling, the crew started saying, because actually Stede Bonnet went with Edward Teach. He went with him. He was allowed to be in the cabin. He stayed in the cabin there. He was still technically, I believe, the captain, but he was kind of one of those captains that nobody respected. He had a leadership position, but it was merely for the money that he had at the time. But Blackbeard was acting as kind of I don't want to say like a quartermaster type character, but he was more of a co-captain at the time. So, as they're traveling in this ship, they're taking several scores throughout the area, inflicting as much damage as they can, specifically attacking English ships, especially if they found out that your ship was from Boston or anywhere in those areas. They were hitting them, and they were hitting them hard. One of the ones they hit was a 40-ton ship known as the Betty. What a manly name, right? The Betty of Virginia. And it was at this point that Blackbeard realized to himself there was a lot easier ways to take ships than some of his other cohorts were doing. Guys like Charles Vane, they would come in and they would just brutality. They would come in, they would hit them hard and just decimate them to the point where the crew had no choice but to stand down. But Teach figured there was an easier way to do it, and it was at this point when they took the Betty that he unveiled his terrifying new image to the people. This is the classic image everybody sees. He donned himself in with like 6 pistols strapped to him, 2 cutlasses. He came out and just started terrified. He told all of his men, act like madmen, and we're going to look like a bunch of psychos coming at these guys. And what ended up happening? The Betty surrendered without a single shot being fired. And that was one of the amazing things about Teach's. He didn't have to use this brutality and this violence that most of other pirates were known for. He had this ability to come in there and just with a terrifying look and this imagery of, you're getting ready to get a fight on your hands and I am the devil himself. This imagery was enough to make people submit. This was something I spoke of in the last podcast regarding the Doomsday Marauder. You can win through intimidation alone. Just through intimidation, have that ability to get people to surrender. And historically, intimidation was one of Teach's best weapons. A lot of the merchants in the area absolutely feared seeing Blackbeard's ship approaching them. Whenever that ship came in, this is the reason the merchants had such a big issue. Most pirates would just take the gold, take what they wanted, and then they would be done. Because contrary to popular belief, they weren't sinking the ships. They didn't kill everybody on them. They would take what they want and they would leave. Well, Teach had a different idea about this as it relates to the British ships. Case in point, he attacked a British mercantile ship. And this ship had been at sea for quite a while. I think it was about a 12-week journey, they said, traveling from Dublin to Philly. And when he hit this British ship, at the time it was completely unheard of because this was a massive ship, a massive mercantile ship. So you had all these merchants on there who they're transporting their goods and their supplies. They're coming back and forth across the ocean there. Well, whenever Blackbeard took this ship, and like I said, at the time this was unheard of because he had a relatively small ship compared to their ship. So he took this ship, and they go in there and they take all the supplies that they want, but instead of leaving everything else, they start throwing the rest of the stuff they don't want into the sea. And at the time, this was kind of he did this in regards to revenge for the death of Sam Bellamy's crew and how they were treated. But he started dumping, whenever he would take these British merchant ships, he would take what he wanted and then take the other stuff and throw it in the sea. He didn't have to do this, but this was a message. This was a message to the British Empire, fuck you, we're not afraid of you here. And it was at this point that the reputation started to spread because he let these guys go. And these British merchants, they were terrified when they saw this coming because it wasn't their lives they were afraid of losing. It was their livelihood because he would dump cloth, anything they didn't want, it was going overseas. And it was his way because this was injuring the British economy. Yes, it was hurting the small merchant who was coming over here, but it was absolutely causing unbelievable damage to the British economy, and that was what he wanted. He wanted them to hurt for how they were treating his brothers. So they would take what they want, they throw it over the sea. They didn't use any unnecessary violence. They didn't have to. They did what needed to be done, and that was it. And a lot of times they would just load these guys up and let them go. They would release them and let them go. And this allowed that reputation to spread. People just became absolutely terrified of Teach's men, because when they showed up, they were going to take what they wanted. There wasn't anything you could do about it. And a lot of times, when this reputation spread, man, these people didn't want anything to do with them. As soon as they saw them coming, they knew that if they fought back, they were going to be in for a horrendous fight, because the times that Teach did fight, it was absolutely brutal. He had a rough and tumble crew, and they were not afraid of the fight. And Teach was an imposing man. He was 6'4", battle-hardened, many years of fighting at sea, very skilled at what he did, and he had his men's respect. Remember what I said, at any point he could have been voted off, but he once he maintained, or once he established the helm of captain, he never lost it. He was never voted out. His men never voted him out. Now, there was a situation that we'll talk about later, but he handled that accordingly as well. But in a lot of these vessels also, these mercantile ships, they had indentured servants on them. If you don't know what an indentured servant is, basically it was a paid servitude. If people wanted to come over from Britain over here to the New World, they could, if they didn't have the money to do it, they could pledge their servitude to this captain or whatever. They could pledge their servitude to them, and they would basically have to be their slave for X amount of times. And a lot of times what ended up happening is this was a corrupt system. And after a while, they would keep extending this servitude. They kept extending this servitude, and before you knew it, you became a full-time slave of this captain. Or this captain would get you to the New World, and you're still under his indentured servitude. Well, then he would sell you as an indentured servant to a plantation owner, and guess what? Your servitude starts over again. So it was just kind of a clever way of making people servants for life. But one of the things that Blackbeard was known for is freeing a lot of these slaves and indentured servants. He would give them the option of, hey, you know what, you can join my crew or you can go. He would take, especially a lot of the African slave ships, he would hit those a lot of times. A lot of people think that his era of origin was around that some of those African ports there, which is very possible. A lot of the pirates sailed back and forth from those African ports. A lot of people think he may have came from there, but he had kind of a special spot for some of the African slaves. And a lot of times he would free these guys, load them up on his ship, give them the option of, would you like to be a member of my crew? And coming with that option was, they got a vote, they were treated just like the crew, no different. If not, he would take these guys back to areas in Nassau, areas like that, and would let them go, and they could just go and be on your way. But either way, he was freeing these guys. And again, it was another slap in the face to the English crown. In the American colonies at the time, a lot of people think, well, you know, it's attacking the American colonies too. Well, here's the thing. At the time, there wasn't really any American colonies, per se, because all of those governors in those areas were British. They were British noblemen who were given those titles. So you have to understand, at this point in time, every attack on America is an attack on the British. So this was another way, because you start hitting the slave ships are coming from Africa. He's hitting them. He's letting them go. He's releasing the indentured servants at the time. He's releasing all these people before they get here. That's costing, once again, that's money from the slave ships. That's money. They're losing the ship. They're losing their loot. They're losing their people, because slaves were money at the time. The American colonists, I guess you'd say the British loyalists at the time, they were losing money, which in turn affected the British crown. So again, he's defying that empire. Every move was calculated to slap the English crown in the face. So when he started, he's still interested in getting this mighty ship of war, because he still held great contempt for some of these cities that had, particularly Boston, that had led to the death of his brothers from Sam Bellamy's crew. So he really wanted something that was able to take on like a frigate. Some of those frigates had 100-plus guns on them, just absolute ships of war, and he needed something that could really go against that. Very, very tough to take a frigate, because his whole goal was to develop a power strong enough to fight the British Navy. This is where the whole idea for the Republic of Pirates comes into effect. These guys were looking to build a powerful enough navy to establish a free area there in Nassau for them to be. And they were looking to, they had their own economy. All these things were happening at the time. And, you can say to yourself, well, how much are they really being, establishing their own thing if they're stealing from everybody? Well, let's look at it this way, too. Who were they stealing from? They started stealing from the Spanish. And the Spanish were stealing from from a lot of the natives there. The Aztecs in particular. They were basically, so you have one group stealing, then another group stealing from that group, then another group stealing from that group. So it's just a massive chain of theft at the time. But there were plans in effect for that area of Nassau to become this hub of an economy where they could start working their own economy at the time and developing their own nation. It was really ending up being a nation of thieves. That's what they were looking for. There was always this dream of kind of a pirate king. And that was kind of the idea they were looking for in their area. So Blackbeard wanted this massive ship. So it ended up happening when he encountered the La Concorde, which was a French slave ship. 250 tons, 40 cannons on this thing. It was absolutely massive. So at the time, he's got a very, very small ship compared to this unbelievable 250-ton, 40-cannon French slave ship. But he knew something that the rest of his crew did not know. And this is where a lot of people believe that he came from this area around the around Africa, where the slaves were. This crew had been out to sea for 8 months, bringing slaves over from Africa. 8 months they had been at sea. They had encountered storms along the way which had damaged the ships. These are things that he knew he could see by looking at the ship from his vast experience. Disease had spread rampant. They had cases of scurvy. They had picked up a bunch of microbes. Just horrible disease had spread through the ship. And he knew this. He knew this was common for these slave ships coming from this area. He could tell. He knew how long this ship had been at sea. At the time, 70% of the crew was either dead or incapacitated. So, at the time, they were just, to the average sailor who didn't know the trade and hadn't been at sea as long as Teach had been, they wouldn't have known this. But he was able to gather this information from what he knew about the area, what he knew about the ship, and he decided, you know what, we're going to attack it. And this was a very, very audacious move at the time. Just the imagery of this massive ship was enough to run most people off, not Teach. So he attacked this ship. This is where he used a lot of the theatricality, where he loaded up, he donned a nice bright red blazer. Mentions a massive 6'4" guy. He had his beard, long beard braided. He had 6 pistols strapped to him, 2 cutlasses, and he took cannon match fuse and had it run underneath his helmet, his hat, and he had it lit, and it was burning, so it created this halo of smoke around him that made him look like the devil. And that's what he was going for. He wanted people to think he was some demon to get these people to submit. And that's exactly what ended up happening. He attacked the ship. The people were terrified. Few people resisted, but they ended up taking the ship. Very, very audacious move at the time. No one would ever have dreamt of doing this. And this was where Teach finally had his massive ship of war. He released the slaves as normal. He did that. He gave Stede Bonnet. He went ahead and issued command of the Revenge to Stede Bonnet. He said, "Go ahead, take this." Stede was better after his wounds, and he renamed this massive ship. He moved some of the cannons over to to the La Concorde, and this is where he renamed this ship the Queen Anne's Revenge. So he had his massive sloop of war, and it was one of the most powerful ships on the sea at the time for a pirate to have. Just unheard of. But it was through his attitude, his ambitious attitude of wanting to be known. None of the other guys just really had. All they were after was the money, not Teach. He was after the reputation. He was after a legacy that he was going to build one way or another. Even if he had to die doing it, he was going to do it. So this started his. Once he got this massive ship, this will start his attack on the Empire. Around 1717, he attacked Guadalupe. And he rolled into this place with this big ship, guns blazing, attacking Guadalupe, which was a British settlement at the time. He attacked it, hit it hard, looted what he needed, wanted to send a message to Britain again. He set the town ablaze when he pulled out of it, left it burning. And that was another message. It was a middle finger to the crown saying, you know what, you've used us enough. You're hanging my brothers. You're attacking us after you told us we could do this before. You used us, you abused us, and now we're not going to take it. December 1st, shortly after, I think he attacked Guadalupe probably around, I'm trying to remember, I want to say it was September or October. December 1st, the same year, he attacked St. Christopher. And again, he rolls right in. St. Christopher had a lot of issues with their fort at the time. The guns were poorly maintained. All they had was a small militia. The militia saw them coming in. They saw the colors fly, and they said, "Okay, that's it. We're not gonna put up much of a fight." They rolled right underneath the fort there, and the fort in a lot of these cities that were on the water, the fort was the big thing. That was what protected you from these seaboard attacks. They rolled right in at the fort, pulled right up to it, burn it to the ground. And that was a massive move right there. Again, a huge middle finger. When you attack a fort and basically not even get these guys to fight back because they're so terrified of what's happening. I believe Teach had 3 vessels at the time. Don't quote me on that. 3 vessels at the time, and he hit this fort, set it ablaze right there at the foot of, funny enough, Brimstone Hill. Right at the foot of Brimstone Hill, he set this fort ablaze. He hit numerous other attacks along the way and just really started carving his path around. He traveled a lot. Even though he was in the Bahamas, he traveled a lot up and down the coast of the colonies at the time, around Florida, up around North Carolina, all the way up to New York, New England, all the way up in those areas. But not only at the time was Edward Teach doing all the damage, but you also had issues with the other pirates. You had Charles Vane out there wrecking shit. You had Calico Jack and Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Those guys, they were out there raising hell. Edward Lowe, all these guys are out there raising hell at the time. And the king realizes, okay, we've made a mistake. We got to do something. So what does he decide to do? King George I issued a pardon on September 5th of 1717. And it was a pardon that was pushed by, it was promoted by Woodes Rogers. Woodes Rogers was actually, a lot of people know him as this, oh, he's the guy that saved the Bahamas and did this. Woodes Rogers' history is that of a slaver. He operated in the slave trade that's how he developed his fortune, was through the slave trade. So, yeah, he sounds like a great guy. But basically, under this idea, all pirates were freed. They were issued a pardon. Even if they were captured at the time, as soon as they got back to shore, they were issued a pardon, and they were pardoned of all their deeds that they had done. This was the only way that the British thought that they could stop the pirates in this area. And it was actually a very, very good strategy because most people ended up going with it. But not Edward Teach. He realized at the time, remember I said that his name was the name of Edward Teach, Edward Thatch, whatever, that it was a pseudonym. Well, he knew that if he used his real name in this, there might be retaliation against his family. And he did not want to hit this pardon. Remember, he still held contempt for what had happened to his brothers all this time. And he's thinking to himself, you're just going to issue me a piece of paper and I'm going to roll over and show my belly and say, you know what, it's okay, I forget everything. No, he wasn't going to do it. He was going to fight, and he was going to talk to his pirate brothers, and they were going to fight. So, at this time, you see Teach kind of move off into the Spanish area of around Florida and everything, and you see the guy, he kind of disappears for a little bit, but when he reemerged, he had acquired 4 ships, and plus the Queen Anne's at that time had a 42 guns on it. 42 guns on that thing. That's a massive. I've managed to be on a 20 gun ship, and it's quite imposing. I can't imagine a 42 gunner. So you had Teach with he started, as you can see, he's starting to develop a fleet. He's got 4 ships, a massive fleet. They're steady taking small scores along the way. They're attacking British. They're attacking Spanish. All these areas, they're hitting them. And he's still thinking, we're going to join together. We're going to fight back. We're going to create a free Nassau. So at this time, you had a separation between him and Stede Bonnet. They were still working together. Stede Bonnet was traveling with him. You had the Queen Anne's Revenge and the Revenge amongst those ships in his fleet. Stede Bonnet had moved off and attacked a ship out of Boston known as the Protestant Caesar was the name of it. Well, apparently not learning his mistake, Stede Bonnet hit the ship and, the first time they were attacked and nearly killed, he hit this ship when he shouldn't have, and he got his ass kicked yet again. Once they managed to survive, but when they come back and met back up with the Queen Anne's Revenge, Teach had found out what happened, and the crew was complaining, and they promptly removed Stede Bonnet as captain from the Revenge. And basically, Bonnet was placed kind of under a house arrest on the Queen Anne's Revenge with Blackbeard. Just kind of I respect you, and I like you. You kind of helped me out, so just hang out in the quarters here and don't bother anybody. It was kind of one of those deals. But he wasn't happy about the fact that this ship from Boston, after all, he still remembered what happened with Sam Bellamy. He was upset about how this ship from Boston had kicked the ass of one of his fleet. So he went looking for the Revenge, and he found it. He found the Revenge. It was anchored, and when he found the Revenge, the captain surrendered pretty readily. And from what I understand, Teach basically told him, "Look, we're gonna burn your ship to the ground if you don't surrender." The guy surrendered, came over. Him and the captain had a few words. The captain ended up surrendering amongst many insults, to which Teach responded, "You know what? Guess what? I forgot that your ship is from Boston. We're gonna burn it to the ground anyway." So they set the Protestant Caesar ablaze and burn it to the ground. But he did live up to his word as part of the code. There's a lot of similarities between the noble virtues and the pirate's code, oddly enough. But he released the men released them into another ship and said, "Okay, you go back and tell everybody who hit you, how it happened, and let that reputation spread." So as time moved on, Teach ended up commanding about 700 men. 700 men. Think about that. And he went back to Nassau and met with Charles Vane. Charles Vane was trying to establish a united front to fight back against the Crown. They knew the Crown was coming. Woodes Rogers had already corrupted a lot of the pirates in the area, and a lot of those guys had taken those pardons and turned their back on the brothers. But Vane was insistent upon fighting back. Well, the problem was, with most people taking the pardon, there wasn't that many people left for Vane's cause. So he tried to get Teach to join the cause. But Teach thought to himself, there's no way we're going to be able to do this. This is a lost cause. We don't have enough men. We don't have enough anything. And despite all the hope for free Nassau, he realized it was a fight he could not win. So he had a choice. He had a choice to either unite with Vane or leave Nassau. He chose to leave Nassau. He couldn't really stay there for fear of just complete annihilation. He didn't want to. He knew what he had. Remember I said he had a lot of experience, a ton of experience on the sea, and he just knew that, again, what they had at the time, the moves that Vane was making, he knew that the amount of armament and amount of men they had, there was no way they were going to be able to fight back and effectively defeat the British Navy. So he left Nassau, and he started thinking about retirement. But he knew he kind of needed one last big score. But along the trip, they run into an issue where his men got sick. Were very sick. Some of them had syphilis, which they had obviously picked up in the wonderful ports there in Nassau from a lot of the whores in that area. So they needed some medicine. What did he do? This is where the infamous blockade of Charleston came in. He blockaded Charleston, and he decided, you know what? I'm going to try and hit some ships along the way. Even though my men are sick, we're going to try and hit some ships. Well, once he hit this one ship, a ship known as the Crowley, he found that, forget all the valuable cargo that was on there. There was some highly valuable cargo on there in the form of some of the distinguished, noble citizens of Charleston. One of them was Samuel Wragg, who was I guess how you say his last name. He was part of the South Carolina Governing Council at the time. And so he sent emissaries out to Charleston and said, you know what? We've got your guys. We're going to kill them if you don't send us medicine and some other supplies. It took a while. There's a long story behind this where his men were supposed to go over there and issue this proclamation, and Teach gave them just 2 or 3 days to do it. His men went over there and visited the pubs instead of doing as they were told. It took them forever to get back. By the time they got back, Teach was so pissed off, he was just about to lay waste to Charleston, because Charleston was very poorly defended at the time, and he was about to lay waste to it. And with a fleet of 4 ships, not to mention that 42-gun Queen Anne's Revenge, he could have laid that town in rubble. But luckily his men got back just in time. They released the people back. They brought the medicine and everything. They released the distinguished citizens back to Charleston. However, before they put them in a rowboat, just to send a message to not make them wait anymore, he actually took them and stripped them down and sent them back. The distinguished noblemen sent them back completely butt-ass naked. So it's kind of a, yet again, you have to understand, a lot of people see this as, oh, well, man, they're attacking America. No, this was the colonies. They were attacking the British in the form of attacking the American colonies. Imagine if the American people at the time would have had the notion to actually connect with a lot of these pirates in the time. Because contrary to popular belief, the people that were hurting were the British noblemen in the colonies, the American colonies area. A lot of the citizens there actually liked the fact of seeing, because there was always dissent towards the British, they actually loved the fact that these guys were standing up to these little prissy noblemen at the time. So they loved this. So that was another issue there. And who knows, maybe the brush fire created by these men actually was enough, that ember slowly burned and ended up igniting the Tree of Liberty to really just ignite a fire behind the American people at the time. So as all this stuff began to happen, naturally along the way, it's bound to happen eventually, the crew began to dissent a little bit. Alright guys, due to time constraints with the network, we had to cut this episode a little short. But if you'd like to hear more about the story of Blackbeard and how he challenged an empire, please check out our website, thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com. You can download the episode in its entirety and hear how the story ends. You can also check us out on iTunes to catch up on any past episodes or subscribe to keep track of us. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, my friends. This is Alan Odinson and Barbarians. The lounge is closed.